The following is a production of Stevenson Media. Want to tip the host? Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description. Get a free Houston Sports State of the Union podcast t-shirt with a donation of $50 or more.
This is the Houston Sports State of the Union podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, the president of Houston Sports Nation, Nick Stevenson.
My goodness, thank you so much, and please be seated, my fellow Houstonians. Welcome to this Houston Sports State of the Union address for the week of February the 2nd. I am the self-appointed president of Houston Sports Nation, Nick Stevenson. It has been a long time since I have addressed Houston Sports Nation. I appreciate you guys so much for your patience and waiting. I told you guys last time that I saw you that I was going on vacation. I did that. I had a wonderful time. And then I hurt my back and I got sick on the way back. So one of the reasons I have not been up here in the studio and bringing you guys the Houston Sports State of the Union is because I've been trying to recover and give myself the energy to bring this thing the right way. So I hope I do that today. It's a busy day. We have a Super Bowl going on tomorrow, so a lot of you may be preparing for that. A lot of you may be watching the Rockets getting ready to tip off against the Dallas Mavericks. There's a million different things you could be doing today. If you have chosen to spend a little bit of time with me, then I thank you so much and I appreciate it. Today's show, we're going to talk about the Houston Texans. The last time I saw you, they were on their way to play the Kansas City Chiefs. Well, they lost to the Chiefs in the divisional round. They fired Bobby Slowick. They hired Nick Caley to be the new offensive coordinator. I will give you my thoughts on the 2024 Houston Texans season, their offseason so far, and what I think they need to do moving forward. I will also give you my thoughts on tomorrow's Super Bowl matchup versus the Chiefs and the Eagles. Like I said before, the Houston Rockets are just about to tip off against the now Luka Doncic-less Dallas Mavericks. In an attempt to avoid their sixth loss in a row, what do the Rockets need to do to get back on track? Was not making a major move at the deadline a mistake for them? I will talk about that as well. I want to talk about my previous statement about the bandwagon Houston Astros fans. If they're going to have a problem this season dealing with a team that may not be as good as teams past. Is that a premature statement? I have a lot of people telling me they still believe the Astros are going to be World Series contenders. So we'll talk about that and all other things we may be able to talk about. We may discuss Beyonce and the Grammys at some point. I don't know. But I want to thank you guys so much for joining me. If you're watching now live, that's great. I would love for you to participate in the chat if you're able to. If you watch this show later, that's cool. Go ahead and leave a comment. Don't forget to please like, follow, subscribe, and share with your friends. Those are that is the number one way you can support this show if you wish to do so. I do have other ways you can support. There's a QR code here in the corner if you're watching the video. If you're not watching the video or you're watching and you're not able to scan that QR code, I will leave you a link in the description once this live is over where you can go to my tip jar. And if you feel like leaving me a tip, I would really appreciate that. Anything you leave me is going to go back into the show. And if you leave a if you leave a donation of $50 or more, I will send you a Houston Sports State of the Union podcast t-shirt, cap, hoodie, any type of swag you may want. Just trying to get the brand out there. So I appreciate you guys so much. There will also be affiliate links for Houston Sports fan gear and all of the equipment I use to bring you this show. Once this live is over, I've yet to put those links there yet, but they will be there. I promise you. And then if you want to listen to the audio, if you're not a visual podcast watcher, the audio of this show will be available within 30 minutes to 45 minutes after this live is done. And then if you're interested in sponsoring the Houston Sports State of the Union podcast or interested in sponsoring the Twin Toros podcast, which is a podcast I do in affiliation with 713 Houston Sports and ESPN Houston on their YouTube channel. If you're interested in sponsoring either this show or that show, please reach out to me at HS State of the Union Pod at gmail.com. Or if you're following me on any of my socials, feel free to hit me up in my DMs if you're interested in sponsorship. I would love to represent your business and I would love for our businesses to grow together. Okay. Like I said, it's been a long time. We got a lot to catch up on. So let's get into it really quick with the state of the Houston Texans. All right. The last time I saw you guys, the Houston Texans were going into the divisional round, which is a place that the Texans have been before. But if you're a Houston Texans fan, you know all too well that they have never been past the divisional round of the playoffs. For me, as a fan, I was optimistic that perhaps they could shock the world and get it done. And I'll be honest with you, they did have a chance. There was a lot of controversy in that game. There's a lot of controversy in every Kansas City Chiefs game about referees, bad calls, and there were plenty of bad calls. If you guys watched the live of me and Ruben from Tejas Brewery, I talked about it pretty often in the middle of that game, that it was getting to the point where it's difficult to even watch. And emotionally, I said, man, it makes you not even want to watch football. I think the NFL knows that people are not going to stop watching football. It's one of the reasons that I don't think they take any accountability for terrible game-changing calls that happen in these games. And it just seems to happen in favor of the Chiefs more often than not. And listen, the saying goes, if there's smoke, there's fire. Enough people have complained about the referees in the Kansas City Chiefs. And the reason this is relevant is because they are playing in the Super Bowl tomorrow. And the last time they played in the Super Bowl versus the Philadelphia Eagles, it was a very controversial pass interference or holding call that helped them win that game in the first place. And that is something that has continued to be a narrative around this team ever since then. So in the Houston Texans game this season, yes, there were terrible calls. There were terrible non-calls that could have helped the Texans out that they did not get. And it seemed like the Kansas City Chiefs all season long, every team has to overcome their own mistakes. Every team there's no team that's perfect. But it seems like the Kansas City Chiefs recently are the only team that can get away with not playing perfect and get help from the referees. Because if you are not perfect and you're playing against the Chiefs, you're not going to win. Because not only do you have to overcome your own mistakes, which every team makes mistakes, every team, has miscommunication on defense, every team, has negative plays on offense. But it just seems like you have to be perfect on your end in order to overcome the fact that the referees are going to not make it so that the Kansas City Chiefs need to be perfect. There's a lot of people saying, oh, that's a loser mentality, but I'm sorry, you cannot watch these games. And I'm not saying the reason the Texans lost is because of the terrible calls in that game, but what I'm saying is those terrible calls did have an effect. Now, it's possible that if the Texans defense had gotten off the field on multiple third downs where they got bailed out, the Chiefs got bailed out by calls from the refs, it's possible that the offense wouldn't have done anything with that. But we don't know. And I think the Houston Texans should have had an opportunity once they successfully got off the field on third down, instead of getting bailed out by terrible calls, like give the Texans an opportunity. If they don't score when they get the ball back, then they're not the better team. But the Texans outgained the Chiefs in that game, offensively, on the ground, and through the air. It was the penalties that really made the difference. And there were some problems with the Texans, obviously missing 2 field goals, missing an extra point, not taking advantage of opportunities you had. CJ Stroud obviously getting sacked 8 times. That didn't help. So I'm not saying it's the reason the Texans lost. But it was definitely a part of the conversation that the referees should never be a part of the conversation, in my opinion. Now, the season overall for the Houston Texans in 2024, I said multiple times on this show and on the Twin Toros podcast that if the Texans did not win 2 playoff games, this season was not a success. So by that standard, obviously this season was not a success. However, when you consider the fact that the Houston Texans 2 years ago were the worst team in the league, or one of the worst teams in the league, they'd only won 2 games. We've talked about it. They've only won, 4 games in 5 years, or seven games in 4 years, or something like that. They were bad. They were terrible. And the fact that they've got back-to-back 10-game winning seasons, back-to-back division championships. I've talked about multiple times how maybe last year they overachieved. And so this year was probably right about where they should have been. Now, I talked about this with Ruben on the Twin Toros podcast, the very last episode we did. Houston Texans are not going to be happy with a 10-game win season, and another divisional round loss next season. The bar has definitely been raised now. And I said that DeMeco Ryans got a 6-year contract for a reason, because he's trying to build something that's long-term. He's trying to build a foundation, and I think he's done a good job of doing that, and we should give him the opportunity. I don't think anyone should be calling or questioning his job security until somewhere in the 4th or 5th season of his contract, because of what he was inherited. And I want you guys to keep this in mind, and this is going to be a good segue to the firing of Bobby Slowick. DeMeco Ryans was coached by Gary Kubiak. And Gary Kubiak, as successful as he was as a Houston Texans coach, you guys have to keep in mind, he was hired to be the Texans coach in 2006. The Texans did not make the playoffs until 2011. And one could add that team that Gary Kubiak inherited was just as bad previously as the Texans team that DeMeco Ryans inherited, excuse me. However, DeMeco Ryans did get his franchise quarterback in his first season, whereas Gary Kubiak tried to make it work with David Carr for one season. Instead of drafting a quarterback after that, decided to go with a young veteran backup of Michael Vick in Matt Schaub. And he had success with Matt Schaub, but he didn't have success until he got a real defensive coordinator in 2011 when they hired Wade Phillips. Excuse me. If you guys, I'm still doing the name thing, and I'm going to try to get better. I drank some coffee. I'm awake this morning. When they hired Wade Phillips, now they finally had a good defensive coach. And the reason I'm saying this is because Gary Kubiak probably should have gotten on board with hiring a experienced defensive coordinator long before he did. And what I like about the move of DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio letting Bobby Slowick go is that they didn't make the same mistake of letting loyalty to one person honestly cost the team. I was actually surprised when I found out that Bobby Slowick got fired, but I was happy because it showed me that this organization is going to put a priority on holding people accountable. Bobby Slowick, as good as he was in his first season, he regressed in his second season, and in turn, that made CJ Stroud regress. So for me, I was glad to see the move was made. I thought firing Bobby Slowick was the right thing to do. To be honest with you, what they did next, I'm not sure I do agree with. They hired Nick Caley, who was the tight ends coach for the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, being in Sean McVay's coaching circle makes you optimistic. He was the passing game coordinator. That may sound familiar because that's what Bobby Slowick was for the San Francisco 49ers before he got the Houston Texans job. Here's what I don't like about it. You hire Nick Caley, who's a passing game coordinator, just like Bobby Slowick was, never been an offensive coordinator, just like Bobby Slowick had not been, and has never called plays before, just like Bobby Slowick had never called plays. So basically you hired Bobby Slowick all over again, except now Bobby Slowick actually has more experience as an offensive coordinator and calling plays than Nick Caley does. Now, maybe Nick Caley is just a much better coach than Bobby Slowick. We're going to find that out. But there's no evidence to suggest that he is any better, at least not to us, the blind eye. Now, people who know ball, people in the league who study and, are familiar with these coaches, maybe Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans know something all of us don't. I most certainly hope so. Because on the surface, it doesn't look like it's a very good idea to basically do the same thing you did the first time. We've talked about multiple times how being a rookie head coach, hiring a rookie offensive coordinator to coach your rookie quarterback and your rookie center, in hindsight, was a really bad decision. And even though that wasn't a good idea, I mean, you look at the result, once again, Texans back-to-back 10-win seasons. But perhaps if you'd have brought in a little bit more experience on your coaching staff, maybe you could have done even better than that. Maybe you would have finally gotten past the divisional round. That's all speculation. And honestly, my opinion is speculation at this point because Nick Caley could come in here and be incredible. The good news is Chris Strouser will no longer be the offensive line coach. I don't know if he's been replaced with anyone yet, but obviously that's going to happen. So that's good. Listen, at least they didn't stand pat and say, hey, we're just going to run this thing back. Was hiring Nick Caley the right idea? I don't think so, but I will be the first person to admit I'm wrong if and when that happens. Now, I think regardless of who the coaches are, there's going to have to be some personnel moves made on this team. Obviously, number one being the offensive line. We can all agree that was the weak point of this team. And there's some pretty good offensive linemen in free agency that will be available. I know that the Texans are not going to have a ton of cap room, but they should have enough room to sign at least one guy. And then I would think they would have to use their first-round draft pick on another offensive lineman. Some of the free agent offensive linemen, obviously Trey Smith, the guard from the Kansas City Chiefs, who will be playing in the Super Bowl tomorrow. He's the obvious number one pick. If you can land him, then great. I don't know that the Texans are going to be able to land him. I think the Chiefs if the Chiefs aren't going to keep him, it's going to be somebody with a lot of cap space who's probably going to throw a ton of money at this guy. But maybe, it depends on what's important to him. Is winning important to him? Is getting the bag important to him? Is there some way he can find a way to get both? I think he could get a pretty decent bag from the Texans, and I think it would be a good situation for him. But obviously, he's the number one choice. Like, Nick Caserio should definitely at least be trying to talk to his people about coming here, because guard is a weakness on this team. Shaq Mason was terrible last season. I was really upset that they put him back in the playoff game when the offensive line in the wild card round actually looked pretty good as constructed without Shaq Mason. It wasn't great. The offensive line was terrible. So obviously there's a lot of things that need to happen here. Other than Laramie Tunsil, I don't know that anyone is safe. Obviously Drew Scruggs is pretty young, so you're going to give him an opportunity to get another year under his belt. But bringing in Trey Smith at guard, you're automatically going to have a better offensive line. I think replacing, I know that Shaq Mason still has another year on his deal, but I wouldn't mind, depending on what the cap hit's going to be, maybe you can trade him for, a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. Maybe you find a way to cut him loose and bring somebody else in. But I feel like, obviously, he's not the weakest link on the offensive line. We all know that was Kenyon Green. Kenyon Green, I don't want to see him on the field. He can be a backup as far as I'm concerned. I think that you should be looking to draft his replacement in the first round. If you're not drafting his replacement, then you're replacing him with somebody in free agency. If you get a guard in free agency, then I think you should draft a tackle, or vice versa. If you get a tackle in free agency, which is harder to do, then I think you should get a guard in the draft. Now, drafting a guard in the first round, that's a little bit iffy. You do have other things on this team that you need, but offensive line is where you got to look. If you can't land Trey Smith, I would say go for Tyron Smith from the Jets, or maybe Walker Little from the Jags. I'm sure those guys are sick of losing and would like to come to a winning organization. So maybe you have an opportunity to land one of those guys. They're not the top tier, but they're in that middle tier where they would be solid pickups. Tyron Smith is old. He's younger than me, but in football years, he's old. But I think he's still good enough. You give him a 1, maybe 2-year deal, or maybe a 1-year deal with a team or player option, and I think you can make that happen. Really quick, the Rockets are down 19-11. I make it 19-13 as Cam Whitmore scores to the Dallas Mavericks, who are now without Luka Doncic. We'll get to that in a little bit during the State of the Houston Rockets, but if you guys are keeping an eye on me and an eye on the game, then I just wanted to update you guys with the score. Once you figure out the offensive line, you got to figure out who's your wide receiver number 2 and who's your wide receiver 3. Do you bring back Stephon Diggs, or do you shoot for another free agent like T. Higgins? T. Higgins actually made a tweet that said, "Houston, what's up?" And I can't remember what emoji it was. I think it was the eyes emoji. I can't remember. I'm not looking directly at the tweet. T. Higgins is probably the best wide receiver free agent available. T. Higgins is probably going to make a lot of money. I don't know if that's where the Houston Texans go, but Joe Mixon, who is a former teammate of Higgins, he said that he knows that Caserio has got something big up his sleeve. Is it that? Maybe does he know that Trey Smith is coming I don't know. But those two things, the tweet from T. Higgins and then his former teammate saying, hey, Nick Caserio's got something big up his sleeve, that made me kind of wonder, like, are the Texans going to go after T. Higgins? Obviously, if you go after T. Higgins, you're not bringing Stephon Diggs back. I unfortunately think you need to start preparing this team for life without Tank Dell, because Tank Dell has had season-ending injuries in back-to-back seasons to his lower extremities, and we all know that Tank Dell, his biggest weapon is his speed, his quickness, and if he continues to injure his lower extremities, obviously his speed and his quickness is going to start to diminish rather quickly. But I think that's the priority. I think you get the offensive line fixed, and then you figure out who's going to be your wide receivers. I think you search for a safety to replace Jimmy Ward, and you might want to draft a couple of safeties, because I don't know if this team's going to keep Jalen Petrie when it comes time for him to get paid. I think next year is his last year before he becomes a free agent. I don't know. Maybe you franchise a safety. Safeties aren't that expensive if you put a franchise tag on them. But you're going to have to start preparing this team to get ready to pay the likes of C.J. Stroud, to pay Will Anderson Jr., maybe even to pay Henry To'oTo'o, who knows. But you're going to have to start getting ready to pay some of these young guys who you drafted, in the next couple of years. Most of these guys are not waiting until their fifth-year option to negotiate their contracts. So we'll see what the Texans do. I think next year is a year to really go all in financially on free agency if you have an opportunity to do so. Maybe the next 2 seasons, and then you got to start thinking about, obviously the Texans have to draft well, because once it comes time to pay C.J. Stroud, their strategy is going to have to change. We've talked about that many times. Like, you want to go hard in free agency while your quarterback is cheap. But once he's no longer cheap, then you're going to have to be able to draft good talent that's inexpensive. So the Texans maybe have 2 years before they have to start transitioning into that, hey, we need to start figuring out ways to save money so that we can pay our quarterback. But all in all, I can't say it was an unsuccessful season, especially if it turns out that you lost to the 3-time back-to-back Super Bowl champions if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl tomorrow, which honestly I really hope that they don't. I'm so tired of the Chiefs. I'm so tired of seeing Taylor Swift cheer in the box. And honestly, I honestly believe that the Philadelphia Eagles got gypped out of the Super Bowl 2 years ago with that terrible holding call at the end of the game that ended up winning it for the Kansas City Chiefs. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, no, they did not win two playoff games, but it's hard to say that the arrow is not pointing up for the Houston Texans. I think the Houston Texans are on the right track. I'm like I said, I'm glad they didn't say, hey, we're going to stand pat and just run this thing back. They showed some accountability by firing Bobby Slowick. We'll see if Nick Caley is the right choice. They're much more qualified to make that decision than I am. I just have question marks, once again, about doing the same thing you did over again. Hiring a guy with no experience, never called plays, never been an offensive coordinator. Like I said, at this point, Bobby Slowick has more experience as an offensive coordinator than Nick Caley is. Perhaps Nick Caley is just that much better of a coach. We will find out. In the meantime, I will say that the state of the Houston Texans is strong. Let's go ahead and get into the state of the Houston Rockets. Okay. The Houston Rockets are currently on a 6-game losing streak. Hopefully they will be breaking that today versus the Dallas Mavericks, although they are currently down by 10 and Anthony Davis is at the free throw line to try to extend that to 12. Listen, injuries have been part of the issue with the Rockets, but also they just haven't been doing the things that they do well that got them to, for the majority of this season so far, being the number 2 team in the league. Defensively, they've started slipping. They started slipping, especially since Jabari Smith came out. Ironically, when Jabari Smith injured his hand, offensively, they started to become a little bit more efficient, but the defense has definitely started slipping. Once again, injuries to Alperen Şengün has not helped, although he's been back for a couple of games now. Now Fred VanVleet is injured. He's pretty much the engine that keeps that thing running offensively, especially in the half court, where the Rockets struggle in the half court anyway. But when he's gone, it is a real struggle. So here's my thing. Because the trade deadline just passed, and a lot of people are upset that the Houston Rockets, in the midst of a 6-game losing streak, didn't do anything to improve the team. They did trade for Tyler Zeller, which I think was a solid move. Tyler Zeller's a good big man. Tyler Zeller is someone who plays good defense, is serviceable offensively, gets good rebounds. It's somebody to add some depth to a position that the Rockets needed depth at. However, number one, I think the Rockets front office and the owner, Tillman Fertitta, and the GM, Rafael Stone, I don't think they expected the Rockets to be contenders this season. I don't think they expected them to hold serve at the number 2 seed as long as they did. And so I don't think they were in a hurry to try to make some big move to make the Houston Rockets contenders this year. I think that's the right decision. I think staying pat during this trade deadline, excuse me, as one of the super loud trucks drives by my studio. Staying pat, seeing what you have in this young squad. This is all important experience for them. Going through this losing streak, seeing how they respond to this controversy, seeing how they are they going to hold together? Are they going to fall apart? Letting some of these veterans teach. Not only you have to teach these kids not only how to win, but you got to teach them how to lose too, and how to bounce back from that. I like the fact that they're staying pat and saying, hey, let's see what we got. You know, in the offseason, maybe you decide, hey, I don't think certain members of this team are going to be good for us in the long run, or they're not going to be able to help us reach our ultimate goal of winning a championship. But right now, this is the first time that this version of the Houston Rockets has experienced this level of success. So after experiencing that level of success, I think it's important to see, well, how do you handle the controversy of a 6-game, maybe 7-game losing streak? I believe the Rockets are all the way back into 4th place now. If they lose this game, they may be going to 5th. I think it's all part of the process. If you're not patient, which a lot of sports fans are not patient, then maybe you're upset about the fact that the Rockets didn't go get KD, Booker, but none of those guys were getting traded anyway. There really wasn't a move that could be made that would have made the Rockets contenders right away. I know that there was a possibility, or at least they were in the conversation about the De'Aaron Fox trade. I think De'Aaron Fox was going to the Spurs no matter what. And I think that was his plan. And don't get me wrong, and I wrote about this in the Dream Shake. It was early on in this podcast where I talked about how the Houston Rockets were going to be on the clock, because as soon as Victor Wembanyama becomes the best player in the league, which he's close to doing already, and he gets himself some all-star caliber teammates, which now he has one in De'Aaron Fox, I think the clock is ticking before the Spurs are back to dominance in this league and possibly in the conversation for becoming another dynasty. Then you've got Luka Doncic going to the Lakers. So there's a little bit of pressure on the Rockets to claim their stake in the Western Conference. I just don't think they needed to make a panic move this offseason. Once again, see what you've got. Go through a whole season with this squad. And then I think in the offseason you can assess, did they develop enough? Are they trending upward enough at the end of this season where we're comfortable running it back next season with a couple of tweaks to our free agents and a couple of tweaks to our veteran leadership? Or is there a part of our core that we just feel like would be better served moving on from in order to become a championship contender? De'Aaron Fox would have been nice, but I don't think not getting De'Aaron Fox, I don't think getting De'Aaron Fox was worth upsetting the whole course of what you're trying to do, upsetting your timeline. I think it puts some pressure to accelerate the timeline, because the Spurs timeline is obviously accelerated now. Now the Spurs have 2 All-Stars. They didn't even have to give up any of their young core to acquire De'Aaron Fox, which is crazy. So they're going to have a pretty good team very soon. Hell, they might end up being in the play-in conversation, maybe playoff conversation by the end of this season. So while I feel like all of that does put a little bit of pressure on the Houston Rockets, I'm glad they didn't make a panic move. They need to play this thing out, see what they got at the end of the year. The number one thing they need to do is get healthy, get Jabari Smith back, get Fred VanVleet back, and get back to playing their game. The Rockets have always struggled in the half court, and that's probably going to be their undoing in the playoffs, because in the playoffs, they just probably won't be able to run as much as they want to. So I think they need to tweak some things there and figure out how to play better in the half court. But you guys know me. I'm a very patient fan. If the Texans fall back, I'm sorry, not the Texans. If the Rockets fall back to the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th seed, it's not going to be the end of the world to me. Because like I said, I think they were overachieving so far this season, all things considered, with only one All-Star on the team. And, Alperen Sengun is probably the only player on the team who's played consistently like an All-Star. I know Jalen Green has been playing well at times this season, and he's much more consistent than he has been in years past, but I still don't think he's on that all-star level of consistency. At the beginning of the season, I expected the Rockets to be at the back end of the Western Conference. I did not expect them to finish second in the West, which they probably won't. Who knows? We'll see. If they do, it means they are a very resilient team and a very resilient squad, and that will justify everything that this front office did in not trading away their entire core just to get an aging superstar and someone like Kevin Durant or Jimmy Butler. Thank God they didn't do that. But all in all, I still say, despite the Houston Rockets being on a losing streak, despite them being down by 13 currently to the Dallas Mavericks, who the Dallas Mavericks are going to be contenders. This move made them better this year. I mean, ultimately, losing Luka Doncic, we'll see how that works out for them in the long run. But I think this season, they're probably better and more so contenders than they were with Luka Doncic on the team this year. But either way, as far as the Rockets are concerned, I still say the state of the Rockets is strong. The arrow is pointed up. You have to go through some of these losing streaks. You have to go through some of these adversities. And the Rockets have proven to be a really resilient team this season. So I would not be surprised if they get themselves back into gear and run off a few wins in a row like they had been. But this is part of the process, man. They're losing streaks. They happen. It's not the NFL. It's the NBA. You can afford to have a couple of losing streaks. But all in all, I say the state of the Rockets is strong. Really quick, I just want to talk about the state of the Houston Astros briefly, and we'll do that now. Okay, the only thing I want to bring up about the Astros is you guys, I brought up the TikTok that I made about the Houston Astros saying that anybody who's been a Houston Astros fan just recently, the bandwagoners, this season was going to put their fanhood to the test. Because if you started rooting for this team in 2015, you've never really known anything but dominance. I know they missed the playoffs in 2016, but in 2015, they overachieved. They unfortunately lost a heartbreaker to the Kansas City Royals, who ended up winning the World Series. Missed in 2016, 2017. Obviously, they win the World Series, despite the fact that there was lots of controversy around that win. In 2018, they lose to the eventual World Series champion Boston Red Sox in the ALCS. And then in 2019, they lose to the Washington Nationals in the World Series. So 2020, we all know they lose to the eventual champion in the ALCS again. Was it the eventual champion? Okay, 21, they go to the World Series and lose. 22, they win the World Series. That being said, so if that's all that you've known, then I think the Astros, and I'm not saying they're going to suck, I just think that them just being good, that's going to be a downgrade for you if all you've known is this team being one of the most dominant teams in MLB over the last decade. I think the Astros are still going to be good. They probably should still be in contention to win their division. I just wouldn't be surprised if they don't run off another streak of 7 straight ALCSs. I think the league is caught up. I think they've come back to earth, or at least gotten closer to the rest of the league. And they're losing a lot of their key core who made them one of the most dominant teams in the league. Will Alex Bregman be back? All signs are really pointing to no. I know there's still a possibility. But Scott Boras is his agent. And we all know Scott Boras ain't backing down from nobody. And I think Alex Bregman the same way. Like, he knows what he wants. He's going to hold out till he gets it. From what I've been reading, the only team that's even going to be willing to possibly give him what he wants is the Toronto Blue Jays, the Toronto Blue Jays have already overpaid one of the Houston Astros former stars in George Springer. Is Bregman better now than Springer was when he was acquired by the Blue Jays? I mean, Springer was pretty hot when he left. We'll see, man. I've said this about Alex Bregman 1,000 times. If you've watched this show before or listened to this show before, then this is nothing new to you. To me, Alex Bregman is a very good regular season third baseman. And there's a lot of rumblings that he may be wanting to move to second base. There's been talk about if he stays with the Astros, letting him play second base and moving Altuve to left field. That would be really weird to me, especially since, if I'm not mistaken, Altuve is older than Alex Bregman. But Bregman still, I mean, I think Bregman would be better defensively at second base than Altuve is right now. So that part does make sense. But putting Altuve in the outfield doesn't make sense. I think at this point, Altuve should be a designated hitter. That's a conversation for another show. But all I'm saying is Alex Bregman is a good player in the regular season. And then in the post, he has been an absolute beast. And that's worth something. Is it worth making him one of the highest paid players in MLB? If you get a World Series out of it, hell yeah, it is. But if you're paying him and he's on the downside of his career and he's not producing in the regular season or the post the way he used to, that's the gamble you're taking. And I think the Astros are more inclined to say, hey, Bregman, we appreciate everything you've done for us. We don't think paying you what you're looking for can be justified by what you're going to be giving us on the field. And so thank you. We'll probably hang your number in the rafters one day. But we're not going to pay you top dollar to be an average, possibly below average third or second baseman for this team any longer. And that's in the long run going to be good. Does it hurt the Astros this season? A lot of people disagreed with my take that the Astros are going to be taking a step down. Once again, taking a step down does not necessarily mean they're not going to be good. Taking a step down from constantly going to the ALCS, from being one of the best teams in the league, you can still be good, and I think they will still be good. I just think that if you're used to them being in the ALCS every year, you may be disappointed because I don't think they're just going to be shoo-ins. I mean, there was a point in the Astros run where it was just like, we know we're going to be in the ALCS. The question is, who are we going to be playing? Is it going to be the Yankees? Is it going to be the Red Sox? Is it going to maybe be the Rays? Like, you knew the Astros were going to the ALCS. I don't think you know that at this point anymore. Can they still make it to the ALCS? Can they still make it to the World Series? Absolutely. They're just not shoo-ins any longer because they just don't have that dominant pitching staff that they used to have, the dominant lineup that they used to have. There's more holes on this team, and that's fine. Like I said, if you were rooting for this team back when they were terrible, then you're going to be fine with it. If this is new to you, if you're not used to the team maybe just barely making the playoffs, losing in the first round, then this is going to be an adjustment for you. And that's all I meant. I don't think they're going to be bad. I think the state of the Houston Astros is still strong, and I'm looking forward to spring training coming up pretty soon. All right. If you watched this show live or if you watched it later, once again, I want to thank you for supporting the show. Let me remind you of the ways you can continue to support the show. One of them, you've been doing this entire time. You listen, you watch. Please follow, like, subscribe, share with your friends and family. Let them know about the Houston Sports State of the Union podcast and the Twin Toros podcast, which the Twin Toros podcast is published on ESPN Houston's YouTube channel every Tuesday at 7:30. I know it's the offseason, but Ruben and I are going to have a lot to talk about as far as the draft is concerned, as far as free agency is concerned. The NFL season is a year-long thing, so we're really, really appreciative that ESPN Houston is going to allow us to continue to do our show in the offseason, and we're really, really excited about that and looking forward to continuing to do that. So please like, follow, subscribe, not only this show, but once again, Subscribe to the ESPN Houston YouTube channel. Subscribe to 713 Houston Sportscast. That is Ruben Calavillo's channel, my fellow Twin Toro. And you guys won't miss anything if you make sure you hit that notification bell. Every time we post a video on either of those channels, you'll be able to check it out. Once again, I have a tip jar. I will leave a link in the description. If you're able to scan the QR code right here that's on the screen, that will take you to my tip jar. If you leave me a donation of $50 or more, I will send you some Houston Sports State of the Union podcast swag. If you want some Twin Toro swag, I can send you that too. But I just want to show my appreciation for all of you guys' support, both by watching and if you give us any financial support. Once again, everything you leave us will go directly back into the two podcasts that we're doing. I'll have affiliate links in the description as well for Houston Sports fan gear. That's fan gear for all of your Houston sports teams. If you're going to go to a game, you want to buy a t-shirt, a hat, a hoodie, whatever, I will have some Amazon links in the description of the video that you're watching or the audio that you're listening to that will bring up that fan gear. And if you purchase with that Amazon link, I'll get a little bit of commission from that. And that'll be another way to support the show. And then once again, if you're interested in sponsorship of either Houston Sports State of the Union podcast or the Twin Toros podcast, I would love to talk to you about it. You can hit me up at hsstateoftheunionpod@gmail.com. Or if you're following me on my socials, go ahead and slide in my DMs and let's talk about me representing your business and us growing our business together. Once again, there's 1,000 different things you could be doing today. If you chose to spend a little bit of time with me, I do appreciate it. Next week's show will be on Friday, and I promise to actually do it on a Friday this time. We're back on schedule. I appreciate all of your patience. If you stuck with me through some of the inconsistencies of me going on vacation and being sick, we'll see you guys on the Twin Toros Tuesday at 7:30, and then I will see you back here on Friday live for the Houston Sports State of the Union podcast, episode 42. In the meantime, you know what I want you to do. I want you to stay 10 toes down for the H. I love you, and good night.
This has been the Houston Sports State of the Union podcast, hosted by Nick Stevenson. Tune in next week for more news and analysis of your favorite Houston teams. Please follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, the app formerly known as Twitter, if that's even really still a thing. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content.